What if the headlines about tariffs and trade wars weren't just about economics, but were actually energetic messages for humanity's evolution? What if each trade conflict reflected deeper spiritual shifts, not just political strategy? Brenda Howard invites you to consider this radical perspective, one that goes beyond the surface and challenges us to see the invisible frequencies behind the news. At first glance, the headlines about tariffs, trade wars, and global competition might appear purely economic or political in nature. They often seem like a battle for resources, power, or economic dominance between nations. However, Brenda Howard challenges us to look beyond these surface-level narratives and consider the deeper spiritual dynamics at play. One of the core ideas she brings to light is that fear, which is a driving force behind many international conflicts, is often disguised as diplomacy. Diplomatic negotiations and discussions between countries might seem rational, measured, and calculated, but beneath the surface, they are often driven by fear, fear of loss, fear of being outpaced or undermined, or fear of vulnerability. This fear then takes the form of policies that seem justified by logic but, at their root, are about self-preservation. For example, when countries engage in trade wars, they might frame their actions as necessary to protect domestic industries or maintain economic stability. However, Brenda suggests that what's actually happening is a much deeper spiritual conflict. These trade disputes often come from a place of fear, fear of losing sovereignty, fear of becoming dependent on another nation, and fear of economic instability. In this sense, diplomacy, which is meant to foster peaceful negotiations and cooperation, can sometimes mask the true emotional and spiritual currents that are at the heart of the conflict. Brenda goes even further to explain how this fear and competition are not just limited to national policies but are also reflective of the disconnection felt at a spiritual level. Nations, like individuals, are spiritual beings that operate within an interconnected web of energies. When one nation competes with another or imposes tariffs, what is really happening is that there's a deeper, unresolved karmic energy playing out on a global scale. The competition, which may seem like a battle for resources or political advantage, is actually a manifestation of spiritual disconnection, a failure to recognize the shared humanity and interdependence of all nations. To understand this more deeply, it's important to recognize that the concept of karma is not just an individual phenomenon but one that affects entire countries and civilizations. In the same way that a person may carry unresolved emotional baggage or traumas from the past, nations carry unresolved karmic energy. These unresolved energies can manifest in the form of economic struggles, trade conflicts, and policy decisions that appear to be motivated by rational interests but are actually driven by unresolved emotional wounds from history. For example, the colonial past of many nations has left lingering effects, both in terms of material inequalities and spiritual disconnection. This unresolved energy often resurfaces as trade wars or economic disputes. The essence of Brenda's message here is that trade wars are not simply about who gets the better deal or who wins the economic battle. They are, in fact, reflections of larger spiritual struggles playing out on a global scale. Nations are grappling with unresolved karmic debts that are not just financial, but emotional and spiritual. When countries engage in trade wars, they are not merely protecting their economic interests, they are acting out unresolved fears, wounds, and imbalances from their collective histories. These trade disputes are not isolated incidents but echoes of much deeper, spiritual conflicts that transcend politics and economics. This understanding opens up a whole new way of seeing global conflicts. Instead of viewing them as mere political maneuvers or economic strategies, Brenda encourages us to view them as spiritual challenges. These trade wars are, in a sense, mirrors reflecting the collective spiritual state of nations. They reveal where there is imbalance, fear, and disconnection and offer an opportunity for healing and reconciliation. In essence, what Brenda is inviting us to do is to view trade wars, and by extension, all global conflicts, not just through the lens of power, resources, or politics, but through the lens of spiritual growth. These conflicts are not just external struggles between countries, they are manifestations of internal struggles within the collective consciousness of humanity. And just as individuals must confront their own fears and unresolved emotional baggage to evolve spiritually, nations too must confront their unresolved karmic energy to move toward peace, cooperation, and harmony. So, when you read the next headline about a trade conflict or a tariff hike, don't just think in terms of numbers. Ask yourself, what is the energy rising to the surface here, not just in politics, but in me? When we think about trade wars, we often see them as strategic moves on a geopolitical chessboard. They may seem like practical decisions made by countries to protect their economic interests or assert their dominance in the global market. However, Brenda Howard invites us to consider a far deeper and more profound perspective, one that connects these trade wars to ancient karmic energies and unresolved emotional wounds from the past. Brenda explains that trade wars are not just the result of contemporary political or economic disagreements, they are often reflections of much older, deeper energies that nations carry from their histories. These energies, she suggests, are akin to ancient wounds or karmic debts that have yet to be healed or resolved. Just as individuals often carry unresolved emotional baggage from their past, perhaps inherited from previous generations or from personal trauma, nations too carry unresolved energies from their collective histories. These energies are often tied to events like colonialism, conquests, and past injustices that continue to reverberate through time. One of the most prominent examples of these unresolved energies is colonialism. The legacies of colonial empires, whether it's the British Empire's influence on India or the exploitation of African nations, have created deep emotional and material scars that continue to affect global trade dynamics. Many nations that were colonized now find themselves in a cycle of economic disparity, struggling with the aftereffects of colonial exploitation, resource extraction, and systemic injustice. Brenda suggests that these lingering karmic debts are not just historical, they are energetic, and they continue to shape the relationships between countries today. For instance, when one nation imposes tariffs or trade sanctions on another, this can often be seen as a manifestation of these unresolved wounds. What may seem like a policy-driven decision is, in fact, an energetic reaction to historical grievances that have not yet been acknowledged or healed. These trade conflicts may reflect internal battles within nations between two opposing forces: fear and progress, protectionism and expansion, greed and healing. Nations, like individuals, are often torn between these competing energies. On the one hand, there's fear, the fear of losing control, the fear of being exploited, or the fear of economic collapse. This fear leads to protective measures, such as imposing tariffs or restricting trade, which can be seen as attempts to safeguard national interests. However, as Brenda suggests, this fear is not just a political or economic response, it's a spiritual response to unresolved karmic energy. Nations that are unable to heal from their past may find themselves stuck in a cycle of protectionism, unable to move forward or open themselves up to opportunities for growth and cooperation. On the other hand, there's progress, the drive to expand, innovate, and create new opportunities. Nations that have been historically oppressed or economically marginalized may feel a deep desire to overcome their past and build a future of prosperity and equality. However, this desire for progress can often come into conflict with the fear-driven energies of protectionism and greed. As a result, trade wars become a battleground between these conflicting forces: fear, greed, and protectionism on one side, and trust, healing, and progress on the other. The crux of Brenda's argument is that trade wars are not just isolated economic or political events, they are energetic reflections of the unresolved karmic energy that nations carry from their past. These conflicts are mirrors of the internal battles that nations face, battles between fear and hope, scarcity and abundance, distrust and collaboration. Just as individuals must confront their own unresolved traumas and heal from past wounds to grow spiritually, nations too must acknowledge and heal the karmic debts of their histories to move toward a more balanced and harmonious future. Brenda's message here is profound and transformative. Trade wars are not merely about material goods or political control, they are about the deeper energies that drive human behavior on a collective scale. The way countries interact with each other on the global stage, whether through economic policies, trade agreements, or conflicts, is deeply influenced by their spiritual state, which is shaped by their histories and the unresolved karmic debts they carry. In this context, trade wars become opportunities for healing. They are calls for nations to look within and address the underlying fears and unresolved emotions that are fueling these conflicts. By acknowledging the karmic debts of the past and working toward healing and reconciliation, nations can break free from the cycle of competition, scarcity, and fear that often dominates international relations. This, Brenda suggests, is the true path to global peace and prosperity, a path that begins with healing ancient wounds and releasing the karmic energy that binds us. At this point, you might be thinking, what does all of this have to do with me? Why should I care about the larger global forces at play? It's a valid question, and one that Brenda Howard addresses by reminding us of something fundamental. We are all part of a much larger, interconnected system, the planetary tapestry. Brenda encourages us to step back and view the bigger picture, to understand that what happens on a global scale is not isolated from our personal lives. The uncertainty we feel around money, the collective tension in the air, or even the mood of our local communities, all of these are signals that something much larger is at play. These feelings are not random or disconnected. They are part of a larger energetic shift that is moving through the collective consciousness of humanity. To illustrate this point, Brenda draws a parallel between the energetic frequencies that countries experience during times of conflict and the personal, emotional, and energetic struggles that each of us faces. Just as nations experience tension, uncertainty, and division during trade wars, economic turmoil, or political conflicts, we too face similar emotional challenges on a personal level. The difference is that the energetic currents in the global arena are simply magnified versions of what we deal with individually. Think about it this way: when a nation faces a financial crisis, it may manifest as fear, scarcity, or insecurity in the population. People may feel uncertain about their futures, worry about their jobs, or struggle to make ends meet. This is not unlike the fear or insecurity we might feel in our own lives when we face personal challenges, whether they're financial, relational, or emotional. Brenda reminds us that these global events are not happening out there in a detached way. They are reflections of the energetic patterns we each carry within ourselves. The fear that nations experience in times of economic upheaval or political conflict is the same fear that many of us encounter in our own lives when we're faced with uncertainty. The greed and power struggles that fuel global trade wars are no different from the internal battles we fight when we're driven by self-interest or fear of lack. This understanding can be both empowering and humbling. It shows us that we are not isolated individuals living in a vacuum. We are part of a much larger energetic system that affects everything we do. When nations clash over trade policies, for example, it's not just a political maneuver, it's an energetic exchange that we, as individuals, are also experiencing on some level. The fear, the mistrust, and the tension that we feel in our personal lives are part of the same collective energy that is moving through the world. Furthermore, Brenda's message encourages us to recognize our role in this interconnected system. By becoming more aware of our own energetic patterns, whether they're rooted in fear, scarcity, or insecurity, we can begin to make conscious shifts. The way we respond to the world around us, especially in times of uncertainty, can help to heal the collective energy. If we can let go of fear and embrace trust, abundance, and cooperation in our own lives, we contribute to healing the broader energetic grid that connects us all. In this sense, global events are not just happening to someone else. They are part of a shared energetic experience that we are all involved in, whether we're conscious of it or not. By recognizing the connection between our personal struggles and the larger global challenges, we can begin to see ourselves as active participants in the healing process. This awareness invites us to take responsibility for the energy we bring to the world, knowing that our personal healing and growth ripple out to affect the collective whole. So, the next time you read about a global trade war, an economic crisis, or political upheaval, remember that these events are not just external phenomena. They are manifestations of the same energetic currents that flow through your own life. The uncertainty and tension you might feel in your own life are reflections of the larger currents at play. Understanding this connection can help you approach global events with a sense of empowerment, knowing that your personal growth and healing contribute to the greater shift happening on the planet. As we navigate through the complexities of economic uncertainty, Brenda Howard brings our attention to a profound insight: the spiritual cost of self-protection in times of financial instability is disconnection. This disconnection isn't just about physical isolation, it's a deeper, spiritual disconnection that affects our connection to both others and the larger flow of abundance in the universe. During times of economic hardship or uncertainty, nations often react by tightening their borders, restricting trade, and isolating themselves from the global community. These protective measures are intended to safeguard resources, protect industries, and secure the nation's economic well-being. But Brenda challenges us to see that these actions have an unintended spiritual cost. Just as individuals build emotional walls around themselves when faced with fear or scarcity, nations do the same when they pull back from global interaction. When countries isolate themselves, they create energetic barriers that sever their spiritual connections. Brenda draws a parallel between this national behavior and what happens when individuals wall themselves off in fear. When people feel vulnerable or afraid, they often close themselves off from others, emotionally, mentally, or even physically. This defense mechanism, while it may feel protective in the short term, ultimately leads to feelings of isolation, fear, and disconnection from the world around them. Similarly, when nations build walls around themselves, through economic isolationism, restrictive trade policies, or protectionist measures, they are creating what Brenda calls energetic prisons. These walls prevent the free flow of resources, ideas, and cooperation, which are necessary for the spiritual growth of both individuals and societies. Just as a person who isolates themselves from others will eventually experience a sense of emotional disconnection, nations that shut themselves off from global exchange create a similar energetic barrier that restricts their own growth and evolution. Brenda encourages us to reflect on this question: are we building spiritual tariffs in our own lives? In other words, are we creating defensive habits and beliefs that prevent us from experiencing abundance, connection, and growth? Just as countries impose tariffs or create economic barriers to protect themselves, we, too, may impose spiritual tariffs on our own lives, holding on to limiting beliefs, fears, and insecurities that prevent us from opening up to the full flow of life's possibilities. This dynamic is especially significant when we consider the relationship between fear and abundance. Fear, whether it's fear of scarcity, fear of failure, or fear of loss, often leads us to close ourselves off from new opportunities, relationships, or experiences. This fear-based mentality can create energetic blockages that hinder our ability to receive the abundance and prosperity that life has to offer. When we respond to fear with isolation, we block the very energy of expansion and growth that we need to thrive. Brenda challenges us to rethink our approach to self-protection. Rather than creating walls and barriers that shut us off from the world, we are invited to adopt a more expansive, open-hearted approach. By choosing to trust in the flow of life, rather than succumbing to fear, we can break down the internal barriers that prevent us from connecting with others and experiencing true abundance. This shift in mindset allows us to move away from scarcity thinking and toward a mindset of trust, cooperation, and spiritual alignment. On a global scale, the spiritual cost of self-protection is similarly profound. Nations that isolate themselves from the global community are not only hindering their own growth but also contributing to the larger sense of division and disconnection that exists in the world. When countries pull back from trade agreements, diplomatic relations, or international cooperation, they are cutting off the energetic exchange that is necessary for mutual healing and progress. However, just as individuals can heal their own energy by breaking down the walls they've built, nations can also heal by choosing to engage more fully with the global community. When countries choose cooperation over isolation, they create the space for mutual understanding, shared resources, and collective growth. This shift in approach can have far-reaching effects on the global energetic system, contributing to a more harmonious, interconnected world. The key takeaway from Brenda's perspective is that true protection doesn't come from isolation or fear-based defenses. Instead, it comes from trust in ourselves, trust in others, and trust in the abundance that exists in the universe. When we move beyond fear and open ourselves to the world around us, we allow the energy of cooperation, trust, and healing to flow freely, both within us and between nations. So, the next time you feel the urge to protect yourself by shutting others out or building walls around your life, ask yourself, am I creating a spiritual tariff that keeps me disconnected from the abundance I seek? And when we look at nations engaging in protectionist policies or closing their borders, we can ask the same question: are these actions leading to disconnection or greater unity? In both our personal lives and on the global stage, the spiritual cost of self-protection in times of uncertainty is clear: disconnection. But when we choose trust and openness, we create the space for connection, growth, and the free flow of energy that leads to true prosperity. This leads us to an intriguing concept: currency is not just economic, it's energetic. The way a nation handles its currency reflects the collective energy of its people. When a society is fragmented emotionally, its currency becomes unstable. Fear-driven economies show up in inflation, scarcity, and deflation. Meanwhile, trust-driven economies thrive in abundance and creativity. Personal fears around money are often just microcosms of a nation's larger energetic story. Brenda shares that true wealth isn't about material accumulation, it's about alignment with our deepest trust. When we align our internal currency, the world around us shifts to reflect new wealth. The real battle, Brenda believes, isn't about trade policies or economic dominance, it's about trust. Trust is the currency that shapes global policies and our personal realities. When nations lose trust in one another, everything breaks down into tactics, manipulation, and threats. But Brenda suggests that these conflicts are spiritual audits. Nations are being shown where they've failed to act in harmony and where their actions have been driven by fear rather than truth. Trade wars often arise from fear loops. Fear has a frequency. And when fear enters the collective consciousness, it doesn't dissipate, it loops. Brenda explains that the repeating nature of these conflicts isn't coincidence, it's karma. And just as national conflicts repeat patterns from the past, personal financial struggles can be the result of fear-based loops. These cycles only break when we address the emotional roots of fear and choose differently. Brenda calls for us to heal ourselves on a personal level, as the act of healing collective karma begins with individuals. By understanding our own energetic inheritance, our personal histories of scarcity, fear, or unresolved trauma, we can help dissolve the forces behind larger global conflicts. Finally, Brenda encourages us to see trade sanctions and tariffs not as political tools, but as spiritual contracts, temporary disruptions meant to reveal imbalance and drive deeper personal and collective growth. Every economic disruption, every trade policy, is an energetic test. Whether you're facing a financial challenge or watching a nation impose tariffs, these disruptions call us to return to integrity, clarity, and higher alignment. In the end, as we begin to see trade policies, tariffs, and global conflicts through this lens of energetic evolution, we'll shift our personal and collective relationship with money, trust, and growth. When we align with the frequencies of cooperation, harmony, and trust, we help heal the planetary energy grid and open up new pathways for abundance and connection. So the next time you read about a trade war, remember, it's not just about goods, money, or policy. It's about energy. It's about trust. And it's about the spiritual evolution of our shared world. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.